so the magnetic confined fusion, the sun has this huge, so with fusion, to get fusion to occur, you basically have something that we refer to as the triple product, but you've basically got to get your fuel hot enough and dense enough for long enough. The sun has got the huge advantage of density, right? It's just got this massive amount of mass, which is pulling in. So they've got extreme densities that we cannot come close to here on Earth. So we look at the other levers to get that same triple product, right? We can make things hotter, but we've got to try and find some way to confine it and keep it dense enough as well. Now, obviously, if we're going hotter than the temperature of the sun, there's not many vessels around or materials that we can construct a vessel of on Earth. So what we instead do is construct a bottle or a cage out of magnetic field lines. So essentially you create this magnetic cage to confine a plasma, because the fuel that we have is in a plasma state. So some of your listeners, I'm sure, will be remembering, okay, solid, liquid, gas, and then there's that weird plasma one that goes beyond gas. That's where we've got charged particles. But because they're charged particles, they can be confined within a magnetic field. So a clever construction of a magnetic cage, you can hang on to a plasma and then heat it up and get it to the temperatures that we need for a fusion reaction to occur. So that's how magnetic confined fusion works. Inertial confined fusion is where you take a small piece of the fuel, right? So these hydrogen isotopes you mentioned at the opening, and you bombard them with energy from all sides at the same time, and you heat that little bubble of fuel up before it can expand. So that's where the inertia comes into it. And you essentially get all of the temperature of that small amount of fuel up very, very high, very, very quickly, and that's how you'll get fusion to occur there. But by definition, then you kind of got to keep doing that over and over again. In our particular approach with real diffusion, we've got something known as the magnetic mirror, and that's a magnetic confined fusion. But we're aiming for steady state operation of fusion for a fusion power plant.
Okay, and so you're doing the magnetic confinement version of fusion, and I've heard words like tokamak and stellarator for those applications. Are you using one of those designs, or do you have a different design?
No, we've a different design. So the technology, and it's a shame. I really feel like the marketing person for the magnetic mirror was asleep at the wheel, and they lost out to cool names like tokamaks and stellarators. But yes, our technology is something known as a magnetic mirror, and it's not, shiny metal reflecting. It's a mirror effect. So we essentially have these particles bouncing back and forth within the magnetic bottle that we've created. It was once the leading fusion concept in US-based fusion research, and then lost a bit of ground to the tokamak back in the 70s and 80s. And when fusion funding was cut in this country back in the 80s, it was essentially put on the shelf, and the remaining trickle of funding was directed towards the tokamak. So things like mirrors, and so the magnetic mirror and the stellarators and so on, really had to take a back seat for a long time. And I think this is a really typical or a really important point to get across to your listeners. I'm sure some of them, if they're have been looking or reading up about fusion, will have come across the old chestnut of, oh yeah, fusion is the energy of the future and always will be, or it's 30 years in the future. I always tell people, listen, that's just one of the variables. It's time multiplied by dollars. And there
Yep.
was this dearth of funding for a number of decades on fusion, but private capital is now flowing into fusion funding. Governments are taking a look at it again as well, and we've seen this real upsurge in funding for fusion, which is accelerating the progress. And that funding is coming in because we are coming around the corner on some key enabling technologies as well.
It's funny that you mentioned the finance piece because I was thinking in preparation for this interview about the fusion development, and I was thinking, well, would we even be here with the nuclear reactors that we have had there not been a war and the Manhattan Project to create the atomic bomb? Not that we need a war to funnel money into fusion, but I feel like the fission side of the industry kind of benefited from that massive influx of both political will and capital to help boost its exposure as an industry.
Yes, for sure. And I think, look, personally, I'd love to believe that the climate emergency is why a lot of this capital is flowing in. To some extent, that has brought new investors to look at novel forms of energy generation. But I think the real reason is we just need more energy. We will always need more energy, and we've got a voracious appetite for it as humanity. And definitely, I'm glad that's part of the equation. So I grew up in Ireland. Was relatively poor country by European standards when I was born. Now it's one of the wealthier ones, but it's 5 million people, give or take, right? So it's like that's not a huge thumb on the scales of the Earth's sustainability balance. But if we try to give the same quality of living that we enjoy in the US to 10 billion people that we'll have on the earth by 2050, or even if it's 9 billion, we really only have about 2 billion which are enjoying the kind of lifestyle that we need. And I feel like that's a big topic to tackle. That's kind of what I've been focused on for much of my career.